Well, good morning. Today is Sunday, February the 7th. It's a very rainy, stormy morning in Tampa Bay, but I'm glad to be coming to you on this day of worship as I will be back with my Hillsdale church family for our 10:30 service studying the first lesson in the book of Job. I hope that you can join us for that this morning. Now, for our devotional today, the title is The Tragic Consequences of Sin and One Father's Sinful Choices. It is found in Genesis chapter 19, and that fateful, tragic chapter of God's judgment on the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, let me begin. The Genesis 19, then the overriding theme is this judgment of God against the city. Now, God had promised Abraham that if there were only 10 righteous souls in Sodom, that he would not destroy the city. And sadly, we know as we look at history now and read the Word of God that there were not even 10 righteous souls in that city. Now, let's deal with Lot. After separating from Abraham, Lot had inched his way from pitching his tent towards Sodom to ultimately and finally being numbered among the leaders and judges who sat in the gate. Now, the gate of a walled city in that day was the place of business transactions. It was also the place of government and the place of judgment. Now, the two angels that had been with Abraham in Genesis chapter 18 made their way to the entrance and the gate of Sodom. Lot apparently recognized not only were they not strangers, but they were not numbered among those sodomite homosexual men of Sodom. And so Lot stands, he rises up, and then he bows his face to the ground. You know, there was something about these men that he knew was not that of the wicked. And therefore he invited them to seek refuge in his home. Now, in Genesis 19, as Lot made his guest a feast and baked unleavened bread, we read in Genesis 19 and verse 4 that before those men were able to lie down, that the men of the city surrounded Lot's house. And we read that they began to bang on the door, and they were demanding that those two strangers that had entered into Lot's house would be brought out to them, and they say that we may know them. The implication is one of violence, it's one of depravity, it is one of a homosexual nature. Now, the wickedness and depravity of the city was displayed that night as those men of the city sought to violently and sexually assault Lot's strangers or his friends that had entered into his home. Lot pled with the Sodomites, and he defined their lust as wicked, and he offered his virgin daughters to satisfy their lust. A horrendous, terrible act on the part of a father. Now, though Lot and his family had been in the city perhaps for many years, and he was one of its leaders, his righteous judgment of the sinful desires of these sodomite men was mocked and ridiculed as hypocrisy, as they called him a sojourner, an alien, an outsider. And the angels, we read in Genesis 19 and verse 10 and 11, reached outside the door of the house. They pulled Lot into the safety of his own home, and they struck the Sodomites with blindness. And yet not even the blindness was enough to stop those wicked men seeking to place their lust upon these two strangers. God, displaying his grace through these angels, pressed on Lot to go to his married sons and daughters, urged them to flee Sodom before the Lord destroyed the city for its wickedness. And yet, as Lot went to his family, they refused to heed his pleas. They looked upon him as one that was mocking. He had been a hypocrite living in that wicked city, and his own family despised him. As the morning light crested the mountains, surrounded the cities and the plain, the angels hastened Lot, "Arise, take thy wife and thy 2 daughters which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city." And yet, though knowing the judgment of God was imminent, Lot lingered. And the angels mercifully took hold of him, his wife, and his daughters, and forcefully brought them out of the city. They admonished Lot, "Escape for your life. Look not behind you. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed." And Lot sadly protested God's place of safety and pleaded that he might go to a nearby city, a little one, he says, that might be spared as his refuge, the city of Zoar. Well, God heeded his foolish request. With the sun risen, Lot safely removed from Sodom, the fire of God's judgment rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah, brimstone and fire. It was as though hell itself was raining from heaven upon the wicked. That day, all of the city was destroyed, all of its inhabitants, and I might also add, those family members who refused to leave the city. Tragically, in Genesis 19 and verse 26, Lot's wife looked back from behind her, and she became a pillar of salt. She had deliberately disobeyed God's command. Why did she look back? Was it a look of disbelief? Was it a longing for her children to find safety? Was it a longing for the things that she had left behind? Lot's family had dreadfully suffered the consequences of the father's choice, and they were consumed in the wickedness. Abraham arose early that morning, Genesis 19 and verse 27, and he goes to the place where he stood before the Lord. It seems to be the place that perhaps every morning he went to seek the Lord. And there he looked towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. Perhaps Abraham had been anxious that Sodom might have been spared, and along with that, his family, Lot and his family. He saw the severity of God's judgment upon sin. Now, why was Lot and his daughters spared God's judgment? Well, we read in Genesis 19 and verse 29 that God remembered Abraham. As a result of honoring Abraham, he spared Abram's family, his nephew Lot and his two daughters. And never forget the influence of godly people on a wicked society. Now, one would hope that Lot's straying from the Lord would end with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. However, his daughters made him drunk with wine. The eldest committed incest with her father, and she gave birth to a son named Moab, who would be the father of the Moabites. The youngest daughter the next night made her father drunk with wine again, and she conceived a son by her own father named Ammon, who was the father of the Ammonites. Both nations, the Moabites and the Ammonites, would become a curse and perpetual trouble for the nation of Israel. Can I remind you as I close the tragic consequences of one man's sinful choices? Let's choose godliness. Let's recognize as the world presses in upon us its wickedness and its depravity, you and I need to choose righteousness and understand. As a result of that, we might be mocked, we'll be scorned, we'll be railed against. In fact, maybe even bodily harm will come upon us. But God will bless His people. May we be numbered among the righteous. God bless you. Have a great day in the Lord. Bye-bye.